Welcome, everybody. I'm Paul Goodman, editor of Conservative Home. Welcome to this joint event by Con Home and Save the Children on how the government can deliver for children in the UK and in the world's poorest countries. I'm not going to make a long series of remarks at the start. I'm simply now going to hand over to Kirsty McNeil from Save the Children. It's very good to see you again, Kirsty, and without any more ado, it's over to you.
Thank you, Paul. So I think this is about the 12th year of our partnership with Conservative Home. We're incredibly grateful for it and for all of you for joining us this evening. So I'm Kirsty McNeil from Save the Children, and I'm here to talk to you about three numbers that I want you to remember. 48, 3.9, 1 in 3. 48. Someone is dying from hunger in East Africa every 48 seconds. So I want you to think about how many we will lose completely unnecessarily in the time that we are together this evening. My colleagues at Save the Children are right now, tonight, deciding which children to admit to our stabilisation centres and which children will receive our rapidly diminishing supplies. That's the reality of climate change, of conflict, of aid cuts. 48 seconds, someone is dying. 3.9 million children in our country live in poverty. You may have seen in The Observer last Sunday what that really means. It means children sucking on rubbers at lunchtime because there's nothing in their lunchbox and they've got no access to lunch. It means kids going to school in their school coat on over their pyjamas because their house is freezing or damp. It means kids going to school in a school uniform or school shoes that don't fit, or a uniform that's not been washed because the family can't afford to pay the bills. 1 in 3. 1 in 3 parents on universal credit told us in research that we released at Save the Children yesterday that their kids cannot go to parties when they're invited because they simply can't afford a present, or in some cases even the bus fare to get there. They can no longer play school sports, go on school trips, or participate in any of the normal things that make up a childhood that I hope everyone in this room was blessed to enjoy, and I'm sure you agree every single child right across the UK should have the opportunity to benefit from. So I hope when you leave tonight you'll remember these figures: 48, 3.9, 1 in 3, and I hope you'll agree with us at Save the Children that changing those numbers is the reason to be in politics, to be in public life, to support charities, to get involved in community work. You're going to hear what those figures truly mean from some young people, which is what we at Save the Children exist to do. Give them a platform, give them a voice, let you hear about their reality. So you're about to hear from Anushka, who's a 15-year-old from Nepal, and from Liv, who's an 18-year-old Child Poverty Coalition ambassador. Over to them.
Hello, my name's Liv, I'm 18 and an ambassador for Child Poverty Coalition. From a young age, I've always been acutely aware of my own social standing. I went to the local primary school in middle of my estate, in which every single member but one of my class was on free school meals. I was surrounded by young people who were just like me, whose parents were making the same sacrifices like mine, but also having a shared sense of frustration, knowing that we couldn't do anything to help. We couldn't do anything to help when we knew that our peers were coming in without having anything to eat, that, you know, they were walking to school with shoes that were absolutely broken. But knowing all of that and knowing how difficult it was, I feel an even greater sense of frustration now that out of the whole class of 28, of hugely intelligent, bright, creative young people, only 2 have progressed onto university, including myself. From government data, we know that 3.9 million young people are still living in poverty. I walk past these same very young people on my walk to college every day, seeing young people with broken school shoes, seeing them looking absolutely shattered as though they haven't had anything to eat, but also simultaneously seeing working parents, seeing young families who were recipients of universal credit being absolutely vilified in the media, as though they're lazy, as though they don't work hard enough, as though they're doing nothing to help themselves out of the situation, is incredibly challenging. My mum was one of these people. My mum is one of the hardest workers I've ever known, I know the challenges and I know the sacrifices she's made, and to see people like her being vilified in the media every day and by the government is incredibly, incredibly frustrating and just causes so much personal heartbreak for me. The impact of growing up in child poverty will stay with me forever. I wanted to share these experiences with you today, in particular to policymakers in the room who may not have had a previous insight into child poverty and the experiences and the challenges we face. There are so many things that we can do to support young people and their families. This can look like rolling out free school meals to all primary age young people, removing the barriers of having to pay for them, but also simultaneously removing the stigma of receiving them. We can raise benefits in line with inflation, but also ensure that under 25-year-olds receive just as much as those who are over 25. We can scrap unfair benefit policies such as the two-child cap and the benefit cap, which hit poorest families the hardest. My story is non-exclusive to me. It's one of very many young people across the country. I hope by sharing this with you today, not only to get more of an insight, but more of an understanding, because at the end of the day, no young person, regardless of the parents, the financial status, regardless of anything, deserves to grow up in poverty.
Hello and namaste everyone. I live in Pokhara, a valley surrounded by hills. It is perhaps one of the few places on earth where mountains higher than 6,000 meters can be viewed clearly from an altitude of 800 meters. As I live in Pokhara, it's not a big deal for me to catch the view of mountains from my balcony. But seeing the silver-white mountains turn into dark grey hailstones is obviously painful. Pokhara is known for its 8 magnificent lakes, but now they are vulnerable due to anthropogenic activities. Climate change is impacting our lives. We had to stay home for 2 weeks because some forest fire caused our surrounding to be dusty. Endemics spread like wildfire. There are people who don't get to drink pure water because of acid rain, and lives of farmers like us have been severely affected. Lack of awareness within the communities has resulted into limited climate adaptation in Nepal. We don't believe in a green economy that is separate from the rest of the economy. Rather, we believe in one mutually supportive strategy which makes climate mitigation and economic development exist simultaneously. I request the government and policymakers to provide financial support to the less developing countries and invest more on renewable sources of energy. Please reduce the industrial emission of other greenhouse gases such as methane and hydrofluorocarbon rather than only emphasizing on reduction of carbon dioxide through energy efficiency. Please shut down the inefficient coal power plants and invest more on biofuels. Thank you.
And now to respond to Anushka and Liv, I'd like to welcome Children's Minister Kelly Tolhurst.
Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you, Kirsty. And it's a real pleasure to have been invited here tonight to speak at this event. I've been in the role as Minister for Schools and Childhood for, I think, 4 weeks now. And it's something that a role that I actually asked to do. I asked to not only have an oversight of schools, but to have the childhood brief. So, because this is an area that is particularly close to my heart. So, obviously, with Kirsty's opening and to watch the 2 videos we had from our young people, whether it be in this country or abroad, shows how wonderfully articulate our young people are to start off with. But actually, it's really good to hear the child's voice, understand from them exactly what they want and their perceptions. And quite often, us as adults, we are very good at telling the world or telling young people what we think is best for them. But one of the key points in all policy making, whether that is how we are tackling some of the challenges that young people are facing abroad, where they have particular economic climate challenges, but also in this country, it's massively important to hear the child's voice and to make sure that those voices are heard when we are formulating policy. Now, we are facing totally unprecedented challenges globally, but particularly at home. And it is true that now is more important than ever for our government to focus on the development and the well-being of our children and young people. The success and the futures of our children is something that we all care about deeply. And as a local MP, I was driven by the determination to make the lives of the people who live in my hometown better, and to make sure that they were able to look after their children, care for their children, despite all the current challenges. So we need to be relentless in our work and our aspiration to provide the help and the support to those families that need it. And I know that how our children are affected is something that does keep me awake at night, and I know that many others feel the same. As a Conservative, we want our children and young people to thrive. We want to create an environment where there are opportunities and success no matter where you're born or what your background is. In fact, it's not just children and young people we have the aspiration for. It's for residents across our whole country. That's why, under this current government, we are committed to achieving growth in our economy. Investing in our local areas, helping families to get on, to deliver jobs, higher wages and more money for our public services. This is central to making sure that those opportunities are there for our children and young people in the future. The environment is incredibly challenging for all families, and with the increase in the cost of living and the rise of everyday bills, particularly the cost of heating your home, providing children with hot water and doing the weekly shop, the challenges that are currently affecting the United Kingdom and most of the Western world are as a direct result of some of the outcomes of the COVID pandemic and that of the war in Ukraine, which has caused supply chain issues and has sent the gas and oil prices soaring. Now, this has affected all aspects of our life, from our basic need for heating our homes, the food we buy. In fact, it is affecting the rise in the costs of all things that we require the use of energy to create, make, modify and distribute. The pressures that families are currently experiencing are at the forefront of our minds as politicians. What are the policies we need in order to achieve the growth ambition? What policies and interventions do we need to implement to help families and individuals who are currently struggling in this current climate? And that also translates to what policies and interventions we need to implement to help young people in countries struggling around the world. It is also a priority that those families and individuals who are most in need of support get it. The Prime Minister's energy announcement of an energy price guarantee, which limits the price that suppliers can charge customers for 2 years, is a major step. On top of the support for households and the most vulnerable, which has already been announced earlier on in the year. This is vitally important to make sure that families are able to keep the heating on as we make our way into winter months. Also, the energy support for businesses, which will keep businesses open, save jobs, and steady the increasing costs of those things that we all need to live our lives. We know that the pressures that families experience can have a massive impact on our children's well-being and mental health and educational achievement. The government understands this, and that's why we have been providing over 15 billion in further support, targeted particularly on those families with the greatest need, on top of the 22 billion that has already previously been announced. We understand that the provision and access to early years settings for our children is important for their development. We know that on average, 40% of the overall gap between disadvantaged 16-year-olds and their peers has emerged by the age of 5. Evidence tells us that what happens in children's earliest years before they start school can have a huge influence on later outcomes, and why this Conservative government are committed to funding the 15 hours of free childcare a week for disadvantaged 2-year-olds and with children with educational health and care plans. 72% of children in 2019 reached a good level of development versus 52% in 2013. The improvement is important, but we do need to go further. So we have committed to around 180 million on recovery programmes to improve language, train early years staff, and this includes training practitioners to support parents to improve their home learning environments through the new family hubs. We are also investing over 300 million to transform Start for Life and family help services in half of the councils in England. Now, 57% of children in 2019 receiving free school meals, achieving a good level of development, was compared to 36% in 2013. So we are seeing improvement, but that improvement is not good enough, and it doesn't make up to our 72%. So our early years foundation reforms are designed to improve the outcomes for all children, but particularly for those most disadvantaged. We have been providing over 1.9 million children with free school meals, and over 2,000 schools have signed up for the National Breakfast Programme. The government has expanded access to free school meals, and I will be continuing to keep the eligibility for those under review to ensure that those meals are supporting those children who need it most. On top of this, we've been investing over 200 million a year in the Holidays Activity and Food Programme to support those children from reception to Year 11. And there is flexibility within that for local authorities to use up to 15% of their funding to provide holiday club places for other children who may need support but are not already in receipt of those free school meals. The Prime Minister is committed to helping parents and families to get into work and helping working families with childcare. In each of the past 5 years, the government has spent more than £4 billion to support families with the cost of childcare, and the number of places actually remains stable across the United Kingdom. The UK has some of the highest quality childcare provision in the world, but it's also one of the biggest costs facing working families and a barrier for people remaining in the labour market. The government will bring forward reforms to improve access to affordability and the flexibility of childcare. As the Chancellor has already confirmed, we will be taking forward reforms to make childcare easier to access and more affordable, which will help boost economic growth through getting people back into work. We are exploring a wide range of options, but no decisions have yet been made. Priorities for me in this role, and one of the exciting points that I was so pleased to take on this role, is to be under the leadership of a Prime Minister and a Secretary of State who are absolutely committed to young people and families and making sure that they are part of our agenda. Hence my new title as Schools and Childhood Minister, not just families anymore, but childhood, recognising that all stage of a child's life is important, and to have that in the title is a significant step forward. So one of my key priorities for me, because before I became a Member of Parliament, I worked very closely with looked after children, and as a real local MP, I saw some of the disparities that we saw with some of the families that were struggling. So one of my key priorities is making sure that we take forward the children's social care reforms forward. The Prime Minister has confirmed that we need to issue our response to the Independent Children's Social Care Review and implement a strategy by an implementation strategy by the end of the year to improve the outcomes of our most vulnerable children. We've also a focus on workforce and development to enable our local workforces within this space to be empowered and enable our professionals to do what is a very important job and be relentless in our determination to improve services that are delivered by local authorities across the UK. Providing children and young people with special educational needs or disabilities opportunities to thrive and being able to access the right support in the right place and are working to publish, I'm working to publish, the SEND and AP improvement plan. As I settle in my role and look forward to learning from working with our stakeholders, our organisations like Save the Children, who for many, many, many years have been doing great work within the UK, but also in many countries around the world. And as I am sure many of you here this evening would have been on one of those trips maybe and spent time with the team at Save the Children and know the valuable and the most important work that they are doing. We need to work together to make sure that we do get the right policies and the interventions that will support our families and our children here and abroad, and in order to provide the brightest futures possible. That's because they deserve nothing more than that. It's a massive topic. There's much debate within this space, but I'm hoping that within my role as the new Minister for Schools and Childhood, I will be able to take my passion for the development and the success of children in our country and work with our key partners in order to have those arguments, those debates, those challenges to make sure we are delivering for our children with the right policies and the right interventions. So thank you for listening to me this evening, and sorry I've gone on a bit, but great to be here, and thank you very much, Save the Children, for hosting, and apologies, for the event. Many thanks.
So I was working out earlier that were it not for COVID, this would be the 10th event I've been involved with Save the Children at party conference. And as Kirsty told us, you know, the events go back a long way before that. Now, traditionally, the focus of these events has been overseas. And on that, I'd simply make the point that the panel of Con Home readers has always supported basic aid. It's quite a while since we polled them. Obviously, aid has come under some pressure in recent years, and there's been a lot of departmental restructuring. I see no reason for that to change. However, these events in recent years have, I think, had more of a focus on the domestic. That's gradually shifted more and more. So I was really interested to hear you, Minister, because I don't think any minister we've had who's spoken previously has given such a detailed and comprehensive exposition about what the government's doing, and you went into considerable detail. I think if you're a Conservative supporter, let alone a minister, you'll be very conscious that these sort of vast sums go out of the door. You know, you referred to the energy package with, you know, perhaps very little positive response sometimes coming back from certain quarters. So I'm very grateful to you for doing that. The only thing I'd add as a footnote is that I think one of the reasons why you may have wanted to give this exposition is that we are facing challenging times in public spending. You know, there's big decisions coming down the line in November, and now, you know, it's not up to me to anticipate what the Chancellor and the Prime Minister will do, or to say anything now about the position of the site will be, because we don't know what is going to be announced. But I would say this, that, Minister, you were elected at the end of that long period of coalition government. And you'll remember when you will have been looking for a seat and campaigning in Rochester and Strood, that George... That is where you... Well, if it hadn't happened there, I'm sure it would have happened somewhere else. But you'll remember, whether you're in Rochester and Strood or elsewhere, that at the start of that Parliament, David Cameron and George Osborne made a big thing of saying, we're all in this together, and we won't balance the budgets on the back of the poor. Now, I don't need to send any message to you. You're the minister, and you're going to have to deal with all this. But, I would urge the Chancellor and the Prime Minister, insofar as I can, and, the people who make some of the decisions that you, working with them, will have to implement, just to sort of bear that in mind and ensure that whatever happens isn't presented as the decisions of sort of some political faction, but is presented as a viewpoint that cares about the country as a whole, and not least the children to whom this event this evening was dedicated. So, Minister, thank you for coming. We're very grateful to do this. And I'm looking forward to doing our 11th, or rather my 10th, event next year. Thank you very much.